So a big part of what I do as a result is to try and figure out some of the practical applications for AI now for the industry that I work in, with the view to potentially rolling out something that's even bigger if AI does become as big as is being debated at the moment. Bearing that in mind, there are a couple of things that are quite practical elements to AI that we're looking at the moment, and I think that the first one is very much industry-wide, and it's about the potential disruption to how we create content in general. So that may mean things from news gathering, for example, in my case, so gathering information and then repurposing it. It can mean things like in the newsroom, helping people discover stories. Having large amounts of data brought together is kind of meaningless unless someone does the crunching around data, and that's always been the case. AI helps with the crunching, makes it quicker. For those of you who work in newsrooms, you'll know that already you have instant data on how things are performing. AI can be used to help that process and actually help with story discovery. Perhaps more interestingly is the way that AI is now being used to actually create content in its own right. So I think that for a lot of people at the moment, they're not too sure how can AI be disruptive in content creation. I think we're getting to the point now where the creative process or the content making process is actually being linked to data and this type of learning. And as a result, there are already tools that are out there that people are testing and playing with that are starting to have outcomes that are quite surprising. I recently was watching a documentary that was aired by RTE, which is the Irish broadcaster, obviously. In that documentary, I believe it was called, I've got it written down just in case I forgot, Will a Robot Steal My Job? You know, it was essentially about AI. How is AI going to take over certain roles? In the documentary, they had a section on journalism and where AI is going with journalism. And it was really interesting because the tool that they tested was something I'd come across before, and it's something that I believe AP has been working with. But it's a tool called Wordsmith, and it's basically a AI machine that takes in data from an event and turns it into a news story. So I've got some of it here, which I thought would be very helpful for the purposes of this discussion. So this is Wordsmith, and I'll give you the context before I read what it's written. So it's basically a local football match. It's Oxford United versus Bradford, December last year. It was a draw, and obviously there are lots of statistics that come from a sporting event, lots of things that are on the wires and so on and so forth. The Wordsmith tool was basically given all the data and asked to write something. And this is what Wordsmith wrote at the end of the match. So it's an EFL League One match, and Wordsmith says, Bradford City and Oxford United were unable to be separated as the two finished even at 2-2. Bradford City took an early advantage, leading 1-0, heading into the locker room. However, Oxford United clawed their way back in the second half to split the points. While even on the scoreboard, Oxford United outshot Bradford City 10-6 and found the target 5 times compared to 2 by the visitors, and so on and so forth. Now you can hear where the data is obviously pushing the narrative. Typically we wouldn't necessarily talk about the number of shots on goal in a short dispatch like that, but it's there because the data is there. But it's actually also got a little bit of a kind of human touch to it. I mean, you know, when it says, however, Oxford United clawed their way back, it's using, you know, the vernacular. It sounds almost as if it's been written by a journalist. And to be honest, a lazy journalist might have written something that's not too dissimilar to this. So that's what's happening with Wordsmith. Now, not surprisingly, in the documentary, there was a comparison. They brought a journalist in to write about the same match. So this is Chris Williams, who is actually a former journalist, now comms manager for Oxford United. Now, granted, Chris knew he was going to be on this program in advance of writing this piece of content, so arguably a little wordy. But anyway, so this is what Chris had to say. Oxford United were denied at the death as they drew 2-2 with Bradford tonight. An Omari Patrick goal gave the Banthams the lead in the first half, but Wes Thomas leveled with a classic poacher's goal before Joe Rothwell slid home at the 86th minute, and so on and so forth. So it's in the first sentence, it's already got a little bit more character, an understanding of the game that obviously the computer doesn't, and is essentially something that's probably a little bit more engaging for an audience. So I don't think that Chris is going to be out of a job anytime soon, but that doesn't mean that Chris will never be out of a job, frankly. Obviously, the premise of the program was about, will a robot steal my job? So it was looking at the comparison between human beings and what a computer would do. But whether or not the computers steal jobs, it still demonstrates the power of AI in a newsroom and the potential that we can probably get from it at some point.